Would you find it surprising that homeowners that go on the market priced in such a way to allow room for negotiation actually are losing upwards of 5% in the final purchase price? This is Ron Wysokarski, your host for the Black Hole of Real Estate, and there's some numbers out nationally that are talking about this, well, I don't want to call it a phenomenon, how about a reality? What we're seeing right now is for the sellers that are choosing to list higher to allow room for negotiation are selling for 14% less than that asking price versus those that are priced within the market, close to the actual sales price. They're getting within 9% of the actual listing price when it goes under contract. And this is what really matters, is that it's a 5% difference. And so if you're at the $350,000, $400,000 pricing, you're leaving $15,000, $20,000 on the table just for the right to negotiate a better deal. And I think that's where people get it exactly wrong. They want to price it too high so they can come down. The market dismisses that price and doesn't have showings and doesn't make offers, or a buyer makes an appropriate offer for market conditions and the seller just says, hey, you're lowballing me, forget it. And when they eventually get to the 60-day mark and they realize that the price that I have right now is not going to fly in this market, and they drop the price, well, this is where the other 5% comes in. Because now they've dropped the price, someone looks at their property and says, well, if it didn't sell right away, must be something wrong with it. And then they make a new offer that's even lower. And at this point, the slippery slope is well established for the seller. You can't raise the price back up. The lowball offer that you felt was a lowball offer in the beginning might actually be better than the one that you would take right now. And I've seen it time and time again. And let's just suppose that a really good listing price would be $375. But we want to start at $400 because we want room for negotiation, knowing they're going to offer us less than that $375 in the first place. And I want a good, fair margin to work with. Well, what if $350 was always the price and you started at $400? When somebody came in at $350, you're like, oh, forget this, you're lowballing me. And sometimes that first offer, that first buyer is the most engaged, and those are the ones that you probably should be working with, but you can't because they're either not looking or you chase them away. The real numbers are just that, though. If you start too high, your list to sell ratio is about 86%. If you list it in the market, it's about 91%, 5% difference. That's the money you're leaving on the table because you feel you need room to negotiate. In a market such as we're in, and this is not a new phenomenon at all, second time with that word today, but this is real, is that pricing it in the area of where you anticipate it to sell, a couple of good things happen. Number one, you get more showings, more opportunities, and more offers, and maybe two people making an offer at the same time where they might just compete a little bit, maybe a lot of it. Super important there. The other thing is that we are not struggling to stay on the market in those conditions where there's no showings and having negative conversations with agents and sellers alike. What we're finding is less price reductions are needed to get the property under contract, and that allows us to get a better price for that. So what other things are going on in the market right now that's got my attention? Nationwide, we're hearing it from the Zillow folks. And I'm not a huge proponent of Zillow, but people love to go to the website. I don't think that their estimates are super accurate because I've never been in a home, but I digress. People like to go there. It's a great place to shop for homes. There's no question. You can see a lot of pictures. They aggregate everything. They're also telling you right now that the typical price reduction is $25,000. So you think about that amount of money. At a $500,000 listing, that's a 5% reduction. At a $250,000 listing, that's a 10% reduction. So they're telling you typical price reduction is $25,000. And that can be a really big number for most people. Now, we're also seeing record numbers of, we'll call it delistings. And, the Redfins and the Zillows are want to call it fancy names like delistings. I'd say withdrawn from the market, taken off the market, cancel the listing. Record numbers. And why? Well, it's really simple. Of those people that put the house on the market either at a price that was too high so they could negotiate, or the price they had to have in order to sell without writing a check at closing. Had to sell without writing a check at closing. This is really happening right now. So all the people going off the market, delisting, 47% bought within the last 5 years. 13% bought within the last 2. So about half the people bought within the COVID era, if you will, that went out there, attempted to sell and couldn't. And there's a lot of data to suggest that the prices that were achieved during the peak and the frenzy of COVID are harder and harder to get when the homeowner attempts to sell it and maybe recoup some renovation money, recoup the commissions and closing fees when they go to sell the home, because no one wants to lose any money when they sell. At least that's what they tell you. And some people do have to sell. And some people are willing to accept it if they get the same or maybe even a little bit less after you net all the costs and fees and renovations and HOA fees and whatever else you got in there. They're also buying into a similar market where they could very likely make up any differential on the purchase price if you compare what the property they're going to buy next would have sold for 3 to 5 years ago. So I think it's almost a wash in most cases. But emotionally, we work with people every day. I've never lost a dime on any house I've ever purchased. Okay. I'm not going to sell for less than I paid for it. Okay. Or I'm not going to sell for less than I got into it. Okay. And those are the people who withdraw in this market. This is, I don't say a dangerous market for them, but it's a tough market for them. The other thing that we would really want to talk about is that listings for this year are up 8%. As a matter of fact, the number of listings is the highest number of properties listed in a single year since 2019. Now, knowing that a bunch of those are going back off the market for reasons we just described, what are we going to look for next? I would let you know that it's a super, super good time to be going back on the market. Rates are a little bit lower than they were even a couple of months ago. We're expecting the quarter-point rate reduction coming up at the December 8th and 9th Fed meeting, and there's optimism among buyers. There's more buyers in the market since September of this year, the last 2-3 months, than at any time in the last 6 years. So there is increased market activity, and there is a great opportunity for a seller that prices it within the market to get a good price and move on to the next home. So there's a lot to talk about. But if you are predisposed to listing your property way above where it should be listed so you got room to negotiate, I think that is a recipe for limited success in this market. A few of you will get away with doing it, and the majority will suffer the same fate. Well, they've been on the market a long, long time and faced with a big price reduction, which should have been the price in the first place, or just going off the market and delaying where you want to move in the future. If you got questions, let me know. Definitely subscribe. This is your host, Ron Wojciechowski, for the Black Hole of Real Estate.